So in this lesson, we're going to talk about the availability options for virtual machines in Azure. Now, we were creating the virtual machine a couple of videos ago, and we got to the choice of region, and then we went into this drop down that says availability options. For most regions, as of the time of recording, for most regions, the only option for availability we have at the setup is an availability set. Now, an availability set is you indicating to Azure that this virtual machine will be part of a group. You have to give the group a name, so we'll call it AZ Avail. And basically, at the time of creation, you're going to basically identify this group. This machine is part of this group. Now, Microsoft is going to distribute these virtual machines across multiple hardware servers and across multiple servers in a rack in order to provide you two benefits. One of them, you'll see here on screen, called fault domains. And a fault domain is a physical, unexpected point of failure within the Azure network. And so if you have two virtual machines, let's say the scenario is you have two virtual machines not in an availability set, and by some chance, both of those virtual machines are running on the same physical computer within Azure. Something happens to that computer, the hardware fails, the power supply dies, and both of your virtual machines would go down because that computer has been cut, the power's been cut, or the network's been cut. So if you have your machines across two or more fault domains, that means that your virtual machines will be distributed across different physical sets of hardware, and that reduces the likelihood of a power supply failure or a small network failure affecting all your virtual machines. So you'll see here we have the option between 1 and 3 fault domains, and so all of the virtual machines we put into this availability set will be distributed at least 2 physical machines in order that they be physically separated for any potential physical hardware failure affecting each other. The other benefit is what's called an update domain. Now, update domain is much more flexible. You've got between 1 and 20 update domains. And what that allows you to do is basically schedule rollouts of Windows and Azure fixes. And so let's say Microsoft was to deploy a brand new version of Microsoft Azure's underlying software. They're going to go and deploy this in 20 segments, okay, between 1 and 20. They're going to do this one at a time so that no two segments are being affected by this rolling update at the same time. So these machines can be rebooted for software updates and for patches, but it's going to, if you distribute your machines across different update domains, then those patches will only affect a small subset of your machines. All right, so we're going to use availability sets in this instance so that our multiple virtual machines will be distributed across 2 or more fault domains and across 10 update domains. That I'm going to cancel that out because the other type of availability option that is relatively new is called an availability zone. You'll see here that I don't have this option available to me. There's only a handful of data centers in the world, that are regions in the world that have this. Central US is one. I believe France is another. But basically, if you choose Central US, you get a second option, which is availability zone. The cool thing about availability zone is that Microsoft has basically given us the ability to deploy our virtual machines into specific data centers within this region. So if you think of the Central US region, there are at least 3 physical buildings that contain servers, and we can deploy our virtual machine to building 1, building 2, or building 3. And by separating these out by buildings, you're basically even more likelihood that if something was to happen to one, that it's not going to affect the others. And so you can deploy virtual machine to building 1, another virtual machine to building 2, and another virtual machine to building 3. And then you know that there's some physical separation if there's a fire that breaks out or some kind of power outage or flooding, that these things are somewhat separated out geographically. Not as much as an entire region's worth, but there's at least a few miles up between them. Okay. The one thing I should point out is that availability sets and availability zones don't provide load balancing. So if you deploy multiple virtual machines into a single availability set or across 3 different availability zones, you are not getting load balancing with that. You're going to have to deploy a load balancer in order to have for traffic to be evenly distributed. Okay, but anyways, this type of setup, Microsoft talks about what's called service level agreements. And so the setup of having your virtual machines set up in a availability set and an availability zone actually increases your chance. So let's go into the SLA for virtual machines. If you use, let's start with any single virtual machine, okay, using premium storage, has internet connectivity of 3 nines, 99.9% of the time. That's actually pretty good, but still leaves a lot of room for downtime. Okay, if you were to use the availability set, which we just talked about, then you up your availability to 3.5 nines. Okay, 99.95% of the time. That's still pretty good, but of course that's not yet quite 100. And if you're using availability zones, then Microsoft's guaranteeing that 99.99% of the time you're going to have internet availability, right? So looking at this chart on Wikipedia, the 3 nines that is for a single virtual machine is about 40 minutes a month of downtime that's allowed within that contract. When we get up to 3.5 nines, that goes down to 20 minutes. It's still a bit. That's availability set. And if we start using availability zones, we bring that 40 minutes down to 4 minutes. So that's quite a significant amount of guaranteed downtime, the maximum downtime per month. Now, this is a financial guarantee and not, an absolute promise that it'll never happen. But you can see the difference between 3 nines and 4 nines.